Hi, I'm Lina. Welcome to Lina's Storybook, where we share the most unforgettable audio novels. Let's get started.
I lost my left leg in a devastating car crash. When the accident happened, I shoved Julian Mercer out of the vehicle's path, leaving him completely unscathed while my own limb was mercilessly crushed beneath the heavy tires. Driven by a distorted sense of debt and gratitude, he married me, the broken girl confined to a wheelchair. For over a decade, we walked through life together, keeping each other company. While our lives had occasional turbulence, I genuinely believed our marriage was stable, secure, and relatively happy. That was until my agonizing death from respiratory failure, a grim complication brought on by severe chronic osteomyelitis. Lingering as an untethered spirit, I watched him sit by my fresh grave, casually rambling into the wind. "You lost your left leg to save me, but I was forced into a prison of my own making, staying by your side for over 10 years, he muttered. Now that you're dead, I am finally free. In this life, we are completely even. If there is a next life, I hope the mountains are high and the rivers are wide, and we never meet again." When he finished speaking, he struck a match and burned our marriage certificate right there at my headstone. 3 months later, he threw a highly publicized, lavish wedding, inviting guests from all corners of his life. The bride was someone I recognized, his high school sweetheart and first love, Lily Thorne. After exchanging rings, he pulled the woman into a tight embrace, his voice choking with emotion as he whispered, "I've made you and our daughter suffer for so many years." When I opened my eyes again, the scent of summer asphalt filled my lungs. I had returned to the exact day the car crash occurred. Reborn into a second life, this time, I choose to respect his deepest wish. The blinding glare of the afternoon sun pierced my vision, making my eyes ache with a sharp, stabbing intensity. The oppressive summer heat radiated upward from the concrete pavement, wrapping around my calves in waves so incredibly visceral and real that it made my heart tremble. The ambient noise of the bustling university campus, the chatter of students, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of the oak leaves overhead, rushed into my ears like a tidal wave. For a moment the world spun on its axis. I looked down out of pure, unadulterated instinct. When my gaze landed on the hem of my floral sundress and the perfectly intact, unblemished left leg standing solidly beneath it, my emotions violently shattered. The dam broke, and I lost control in a fraction of a second. It had been so incredibly long, an agonizing, grueling eternity of phantom limb syndrome, crutches, and ill-fitting prosthetics, since I had last felt this grounding sensation of having both my feet firmly planted on the earth. The texture of the pavement beneath my sneakers was a miracle. Beside me, the man who had been rapidly tapping away on his smartphone, his head bowed in distraction, suddenly looked up at me in sheer astonishment. Seeing my face completely drenched in tears, he froze, his eyes widening as panic washed over his features. "What is wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with nervous tension. "Everything was fine a second ago. Why are you suddenly crying?" I slowly lifted my tear-filled eyes, blinking away the moisture. Through the hazy blurred veil of my tears, I looked at the man standing before me. At 22 years old, Julian Mercer was undeniably breathtaking. He was practically glowing with the vibrant, boundless energy of youth. His brow was smooth and relaxed, and his dark eyes were bright, clear, and full of life. There was no trace of the heavy suffocating exhaustion or the deep-seated resentment that would inevitably seep into his gaze in the years to come. Looking at his flawless jawline and the casual way his hair fell across his forehead, a sharp pang hit my chest. I had almost forgotten this version of him. I had almost forgotten that before the heavy chains of our marriage bound him, he had been this radiant, spirited young man. Sensing the heavy calculating scrutiny in my stare, Julian's perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitted together in a slight subtle frown. That fleeting, almost imperceptible shift in his expression caused my heart to forcefully seize in my chest. In our previous life, whenever he felt I was being unreasonable or demanding, he would look down at me with that exact same expression, cold, detached, and condescending. It was a look that had always left me drowning in a toxic mixture of profound despair and endless self-blame. He reached out, his warm thumb brushing against my cheek to wipe away the tears, and let out a heavy, exasperated sigh. "Are you still angry about me getting into a fight and ending up in the holding cell?" he asked softly. "I've already explained this to you so many times. That creep was trying to sexually assault Lily. I was so furious that I grabbed a beer bottle and smashed him over the head with it. In a dangerous situation like that, anyone would." I took a deliberate step backward, effectively dodging his touch, and cut him off with a cool, flat tone. "You don't need to explain anything to me. This entire situation has nothing to do with me anyway," I stated calmly. "Who you choose to save is your own freedom." Julian's face went completely blank for a second, the remaining words of his defense catching awkwardly in his throat. The campus breeze blew between us, carrying the heavy silence. For a long, agonizing moment, he just stared at me, trying to process the absolute indifference in my voice. Finally, his jaw tightened. His voice came out strained and defensive as he frowned deeply. "What exactly do you mean by that?" he demanded. I lowered my gaze one more time to look at my complete unbroken left leg, letting the reality of my physical wholeness wash over me, before looking back up into his eyes. I gave him a devastatingly calm reply. "I mean exactly what I said," I replied. "Oh, by the way, the bail money I just posted for you at the precinct, combined with the medical bills I covered up front for the injured guy, comes out to a total of $8,500. That is the money I painstakingly saved up from my freelance translation gigs to pay off my student loans. Please make sure you pay me back as soon as possible." In my previous life, when I received the frantic phone call informing me that Julian Mercer had been arrested and thrown into a holding cell for a violent bar brawl, I honestly thought my ears were deceiving me. It made absolutely no sense. Julian was the quintessential golden boy, a polite, gentle student council executive, and a model student universally praised by all the professors in the business department. He was the kind of guy who had never even raised his voice in anger at anyone. How could someone so disciplined possibly end up in a brutal fistfight with street thugs? Let alone get dragged away to the police precinct in handcuffs. Later that night, after I had drained my savings to pay the settlement fees, signed a mountain of agonizing paperwork, and waited for hours on the hard plastic benches of the station, I finally got him out. But when I laid eyes on the man emerging from the back hallway, I was so utterly shocked that my feet remained frozen to the floor. He looked like a feral stray dog. His clothes were filthy and disheveled. His face was heavily bruised and swollen, the right sleeve of his shirt was completely torn off, and his knuckles were covered in raw, dark scabs. This violent, battered stranger felt completely disconnected from the sweet, gentle Julian I had loved for the past 3 years of college. When he saw me standing there, he immediately rushed over, his eyes wide with panic, and desperately tried to explain himself. Lily and her friend were at the dive bar downtown, and some drunk creep started harassing them. The guy went totally out of control, pinned her down on a booth sofa, and tried to assault her. Carter and I just happened to be there. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing, he had pleaded. At the time, I found it incredibly strange that he had suddenly gone to a grimy off-campus bar with his frat brothers. But Julian had always been such a genuine, passionate person, so I didn't harbor too much suspicion toward his narrative. Even though we were a couple, we respected each other's boundaries and maintained our own separate social lives. Under those terrifying circumstances, stepping up to save a woman from being assaulted was the absolute right thing to do, regardless of whether they were classmates or strangers. Furthermore, I actually knew Lily Thorne. She was high school classmates with Julian and his best friend, Carter Hayes. Now, she attended the same university as us, majoring in music performance, over at the College of Fine Arts. Although we didn't run in the same circles and rarely interacted, my impression of her was that she was stunningly beautiful, elegant, and perfectly composed. I honestly had a rather favorable opinion of her. The only thing that deeply unsettled me was Julian's method of saving her. Smashing a heavy glass bottle directly against a man's skull felt frighteningly extreme. Fortunately, the case was eventually resolved through a mediated settlement. If it hadn't been, Julian would have undoubtedly been sent to state prison. The single glaring inconsistency that had bothered me at the time was that the police reports and the investigating officers, never once mentioned the crucial detail of the thug attempting to sexually assault Lily. The precinct had simply classified the incident as a standard, drunken physical altercation. It wasn't until many, many years later that I accidentally learned the devastating truth of what had actually transpired that night from the mouths of Julian's own inner circle. It happened roughly 2 months before I died. Carter Hayes, Julian's closest confidant, and our former college classmate, had recently purchased a massive suburban mansion and decided to throw a lavish housewarming party. Naturally, Julian brought me along. By that point, my physical condition had already deteriorated horribly. The agonizing nerve pain caused by chronic osteomyelitis tormented me day and night without mercy. On top of the physical agony, I suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, which kept my nervous system constantly trapped in a hyper-vigilant state of fight or flight. My emotions were volatile, and I was incredibly difficult to be around. So while everyone else was inside the grand living room, laughing, drinking champagne and mingling, I felt entirely alienated. I quietly slipped out to the backyard garden by myself. The moonlight was cold, dusting the blooming tulips like a thin layer of frost. I sat silently on a wicker chair beneath a large flowering tree, my fingers absent-mindedly tracing the cold, hard surface of the prosthetic attached to my left leg. As I sat there in a daze, staring up at the sparse, glittering stars scattered across the night sky, a first-floor window of the mansion abruptly swung open, just a few feet away from me. Warm, golden light spilled out onto the patio, the boisterous laughter of several men, accompanied by the distinct click of a cigarette lighter, floated directly into my ears. Julian, man. How do you put up with Chloe's incredibly arrogant, ice-cold personality? Does she even know how to smile anymore? She has had a face like thunder all night, making it look like my wife and I were deliberately neglecting her as hosts. I swear she wasn't like this back in college, complained Carter, the host of the party. I heard Julian's low, muffled voice murmur something in response, likely a tired, rehearsed apology on my behalf. Then, another arrogant voice chimed in. Oh, give me a break. There are plenty of disabled people in the world, but I've rarely seen anyone as self-centered as her. I'm not mocking you, brother. But your life is completely ruined. Chloe looks at least 20 years older than you. I was genuinely spooked by how haggard she looked tonight. Tell me, is giving up Lily for a woman like that really worth it? Another guy immediately chimed in, echoing the sentiment. Yeah, if you ask me, Julian has lost his damn mind. Back in high school, he and Lily were the undisputed golden couple. Even the strictest disciplinary deans turned a blind eye to them. But now, giving up an exceptional, top-tier woman like Lily for a cripple, missing a limb like Chloe, it's just beyond foolish. The cool night wind carried a sharp, bitter trace of tobacco smoke directly into my lungs. Hidden in the enveloping darkness, I stared paralyzed at the silhouette of my husband, standing by the open window. The glowing cherry of his cigarette flared and dimmed in the shadows. But he remained utterly, terrifyingly silent. He didn't say a single word to defend me. Inside the brightly lit room, Carter flicked the ash from his cigarette and let out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a decade's worth of secrets. You guys need to back off and drop it, Carter reprimanded the group softly. Don't forget it was Lily who betrayed Julian first. When she got to college, she instantly hooked up with that older frat guy who drove the Ferrari. If she hadn't done that, Julian wouldn't have been desperate enough to find a rebound like Chloe, who looked about 60 or 70% like Lily, only to end up stuck with her for the rest of his life. Carter took a deep, aggressive drag of his cigarette before violently crushing the butt into an ashtray. Besides, if you idiots hadn't constantly meddled and stirred the pot, encouraging Lily to go beg Julian to take her back after she dumped the Ferrari guy, she wouldn't have gone completely off the rails. She got rejected by Julian, so she purposely went to that grimy bar, started grinding on some random thug, and deliberately snapped pictures to send to Julian just to make him jealous. And look how brilliantly that turned out. Julian lost his mind, smashed a bottle over the guy's head, and ended up in a jail cell. If it hadn't been for Chloe running herself ragged, hiring that lawyer friend of hers to negotiate, and draining her own bank account to pay the massive settlement, Julian would absolutely be a convicted felon right now. Carter's words hung heavily in the air, For a fleeting second, a profound, uncomfortable silence descended upon the men in the room. Finally, someone muttered from the back, "Man, why are we even bringing up ancient history? Even if she saved his life, and he owed her a massive debt of gratitude. He literally married her. Hasn't he paid off that debt by now?" Standing outside in the suffocating darkness of the garden, I felt as if an invisible pair of hands had suddenly clamped down hard around my throat. A psychological collapse hit me like a devastating tidal wave. Was this the reality of my life? Had my entire existence been built on this grotesque lie? Piecing together the fragments of their conversation, the horrifying truth of the past finally crystallized in my mind. Lily and Julian were each other's first loves. He was the brilliant overachiever. She was the gorgeous artist. They were the quintessential romantic protagonists everyone envied. But university changed things, and Lily left him for a wealthier man with a sports car. On the day they broke up, Julian drank himself into a stupor. He stood outside her dorm building in the freezing rain for 3 straight days, waiting for an explanation that never came. Less than a year later, Lily's romance with the rich student imploded. She immediately began bombarding Julian with messages, desperate to reconcile. But by that time, Julian and I had officially started dating. Lily refused to back down. She bought him breakfast every morning, waiting outside his dorm. She wrote scented love letters, and had Carter sneak them into Julian's backpack. She kept this psychological warfare up for an entire year. But Julian seemingly never looked back. Until her birthday, she booked a hotel room and bought herself expensive lingerie, claiming it was a final farewell to her youth. She told Julian this would be the last time she ever bothered him, begging him to come. But Julian didn't show up. Drunk and humiliated, Lily went to a bar and sent Julian a video showing a stranger's hands wandering into her exposed top. Blinded by jealousy and rage, Julian rushed to the bar, saw her pinned against a booth with her dress hiked up, and completely lost his mind. He dragged her off the man, got pinned down during the ensuing fight, and in a moment of pure panic, grabbed a bottle and cracked the man's skull open. The brutal irony of it all was that the very accident that required my amputation happened on our walk back from the precinct. Julian had received a phone call, suddenly claimed he needed to grab something from a convenience store across the street, and told me to head back to campus without him. The moment he stepped off the curb, a black SUV lost control and barreled toward him. Before my brain could even process the danger, my body moved on pure instinct. I launched myself forward, shoving him violently out of the way, but my left leg was caught beneath the heavy tires. The tissue damage was catastrophic, resulting in massive necrosis. To save my life, the doctors had to amputate. When I woke up from surgery, Julian was kneeling beside my hospital bed, his eyes swollen and red, clutching my hand as he swore a tearful oath to protect and care for me for the rest of his life. Because of my disability, I dropped out of university and abandoned my dreams of going to grad school. I spent my days lying motionless in a cramped, miserable apartment he rented for us. My only exposure to the outside world was when he drove me to physical therapy. But a year later, when Julian graduated, he didn't look for a normal corporate job. Instead, he took the remaining $120,000 from my accident compensation fund to start a media agency with his friends. Without the money, my rehabilitation sessions were immediately halted. Years later, my doctors admitted that if I had finished my therapy, the chronic osteomyelitis might never have developed. His parents despised me. When they found out their golden boy was marrying a one-legged amputee, their faces turned hard as iron. They humiliated me in front of our relatives, screaming that I was a shameless, useless cripple, who would only drag their precious son down. But I was trapped. I had sacrificed my limb for him, developed severe PTSD, and lived in constant terror. Julian was my only lifeline, and I stubbornly refused to let go. Eventually, my body began to fail. My hair turned stark white before I even reached 40. My face hollowed out with premature aging. Julian became wealthy. He hired 2 caregivers to tend to me and transferred $30,000 into my bank account every month. But he was never home. On the rare nights he was, he locked himself in his study until dawn. He was always busy, always on business trips. The night of Carter's party, my PTSD triggered a massive panic attack that left me unable to breathe. And I was rushed to the ER. I demanded an explanation from Julian, but he completely vanished, refusing to see me. 2 months later, the bone infection triggered total respiratory failure, and I died in that sterile hospital room. He never showed up for my final moments. As a ghost, I watched his face fill with undeniable relief as he stood over my corpse. I watched him burn our marriage certificate at my grave, and I followed him to a massive luxury villa, where Lily, wearing a silk nightgown, ran barefoot into his arms, telling him that now that that woman was dead, their family of 3 could finally be happy. Then I saw their teenage daughter. Julian and I had only been married for 15 years. The math was a brutal testament to his betrayal. The marriage I thought was a safe harbor had actually been entirely rotten from the very beginning. Perhaps the visceral burning hatred, flashing in my eyes from the weight of my past life memories, was too obvious, because Julian suddenly softened his tone. His voice became impossibly gentle, bordering on sycophantic. All right. Please don't be mad anymore," he coaxed, stepping closer. "As soon as I scrape the money together, I'll transfer it right back to you. For now, let me take you out to get pastries from that dessert place you love so much. How does that sound?" A surge of pure revulsion crawled up my spine. As he reached out to affectionately grab my hand, I violently slapped his arm away. Julian looked entirely stunned, his right hand left hanging awkwardly in the empty space between us. Right at that incredibly tense moment, the shrill ringtone of his smartphone shattered the silence. He glanced down at the caller ID on the glowing screen. A flicker of sheer panic crossed his face as he nervously darted a look in my direction. His expression grew incredibly stiff and unnatural as he told me, "Chloe, hold on a second. I really need to take this call." He quickly turned his back to me, covering the phone's microphone with his hand as he walked a few paces away. But he didn't walk far enough. The summer breeze carried his hushed, frantic voice straight back to me. "Hey, Lily." He kept his voice low, trying to be discreet. "You don't need to worry anymore. Okay. I've handled everything. I'm already out of the holding cell." I couldn't hear the exact words the woman on the other end of the line was saying, but I watched with cold detachment as the tips of Julian's ears flushed a deep affectionate crimson. Then his voice dropped even softer, laced with an intimacy that made my stomach churn. "What brand of tampons do you usually use?" he whispered. "Yeah, okay, I got it. If your cramps are hurting that badly, just stay in your dorm room and don't come downstairs. I'll go to the pharmacy, buy the tampons and some painkillers, and bring them right up to you." When he finally hung up the phone and turned back to face me, he couldn't completely mask the lingering, tender devotion that still pooled in his dark eyes. He coughed, looking incredibly awkward and guilty as he addressed me. "Chloe, I'm so sorry, but something urgent just came up," he lied smoothly. "How about you just head back to your dorm for now? I'll buy those desserts later tonight and bring them over to your building." I cast a brief, apathetic glance at his phone screen, which was currently lighting up with a rapid barrage of incoming text messages, and replied with absolute indifference. "There is no need for that," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "I have other plans tonight anyway. Just go do whatever it is you need to do." The man let out a subtle, almost invisible sigh of profound relief. He nodded quickly. "That works. I'll get going then. Be careful on your way back." Standing in the amber glow of the slanting afternoon sun, I watched his retreating back as he eagerly hurried toward the crosswalk on the opposite side of the street. As I watched him step onto the asphalt, a sudden violent memory assaulted my senses. The soul-crushing terror and absolute despair I had felt in my previous life during that precise microsecond, when my leg was violently sucked beneath the chassis of the speeding car. Before I could stop myself, the words ripped out of my throat. "Julian Mercer." He paused, turning his head to look back at me over his shoulder. He flashed me a bright, dazzling smile. "What is it, Chloe? Did you forget to say something?" I stood entirely still, staring intently at this man who had supposedly stayed by my side for nearly 2 decades in our past life. This was the same man who had fallen to his knees beside my hospital bed, weeping and swearing a holy vow to cherish, love, and protect me for the entirety of my existence. The evening sun cast a strange, hazy blood-red filter over his silhouette. Right behind him, the pedestrian crossing light suddenly clicked green. "Watch out for cars when you cross the street." I called out to him, my voice eerily calm. "Be careful not to get run over and killed." Julian blinked in surprise, clearly taken aback by the morbid phrasing, but then he let out a loud, carefree laugh, flashing his perfect teeth. "Don't worry about me," he shouted back confidently. "Your boyfriend has 9 lives." I didn't say another word. I simply turned my back on him and began walking steadily in the direction of the university campus. 10 seconds later, from behind me came the horrific, ear-splitting screech of rubber tires aggressively locking up on hot asphalt. It was instantly followed by a sickeningly loud thud, the heavy muffled impact of a large physical object, slamming against metal, and crashing violently onto the ground. Immediately, the air was ripped apart by the terrified, blood-curdling screams of pedestrians. "Oh my God! Somebody got hit. Someone call 911. A woman shrieked in absolute terror. I stopped walking. My hands gripped the heavy canvas straps of my tote bag so fiercely that my knuckles turned bone white. I dug my fingernails so deeply into the soft palms of my hands that I nearly drew blood. Behind me, a chaotic, surging crowd of bystanders frantically sprinted toward the bloody carnage at the intersection. Without warning, a violent, uncontrollable spasm violently seized my stomach, flipping it entirely upside down. I couldn't hold it back any longer. I bent completely double at the waist and began to violently dry heave onto the pavement. I stumbled back to the dorm in a daze, only to be met with a pair of hesitant, anxious eyes. "Chloe." My roommate Mia started, her voice trailing off. I threw my canvas tote bag and phone onto the desk as if all the strength had been completely drained from my body. I grabbed my water bottle and aggressively gulped down the cold liquid. The freezing water slid down my throat, cooling the intense, fiery sensation burning in my chest. "What is it, Mia?" I asked. Mia hesitated for a moment before pushing her phone across the desk toward me. "This post went up on the forum just 5 minutes ago. The guy who got hurt. It isn't Julian from our cohort, is it?" she asked softly. I glanced at the glowing screen. The bold headline on the university forum read, "Business major Julian Mercer involved in severe car crash near Campus Square." Although the accompanying photo was heavily pixelated, the dark, blurry pool of crimson blood on the pavement was still visually horrifying. I stared at the post for a long time, completely silent. Right at that moment, my phone began to vibrate violently against the wooden desk. It was an unknown landline number. I tapped the screen and put it on speakerphone. An urgent female voice crackled through the speaker. "Hello. Is this Chloe? We are calling from the emergency department at City Hospital. Julian Mercer was in a car accident and is severely injured. We need you or his family to come to the ER immediately." I frowned deeply. Shouldn't the hospital directly contact the university administration or his immediate family? Why would they call me directly? I replied coolly. "I'm sorry, but Julian and I are just ordinary classmates. I suggest you contact his family directly." The woman on the other end was clearly taken aback. "The only emergency contact listed on the patient's phone is you. Could you please help us get in touch with his relatives? I don't have his family's contact information. I have other things to deal with right now, so I'm going to hang up," I stated firmly. With that, I decisively ended the call. When I looked up, I was met with 3 faces staring at me in utter, jaw-dropping shock. Their mouths were slightly parted, looking at me as if they were meeting a stranger for the very first time. But I had absolutely no desire to explain myself at that moment. I merely dragged my heavy legs toward the bathroom. Over the next 2 days, the students in my classes constantly huddled together, whispering about something, but the moment I walked by, their conversations would abruptly cease. I didn't even need to think about it. They were definitely gossiping about me behind my back. I couldn't care less. I attended my lectures as usual, ate my meals alone, and spent my free time studying in the library. Finally, before my morning class on the fourth day, Julian's roommate, Carter Hayes, blocked my path in the hallway. His face was twisted with fury as he snapped, "Chloe, do you even have a heart? Julian is lying in a hospital bed right now. He suffered a comminuted fracture in his right leg. And the doctors say there is a high probability he'll be permanently disabled, so he was only going to have a limp. In my previous life, I had my entire left leg amputated." I maintained a flat, emotionless expression, and calmly retorted, "And?" Carter's face contorted slightly, his anger boiling over as he shouted, "Almost everyone in our class has gone to see him. Even Zach from the student council, who openly hates him, went to visit. But what about you? You're his girlfriend. Yet you haven't even given him a single phone call. Is your heart made of stone?" I rolled my eyes at him slightly and replied, "Who knows? Maybe Zach only went to the hospital to laugh at him." "You?" Carter choked on his words, completely enraged. For a moment he couldn't even find the words to argue back. I looked directly into his eyes and firmly reminded him, "Perhaps the person you should be notifying about Julian's injury is Lily Thorne, not me." Carter's expression instantly froze. The atmosphere in the hallway stalled for a heavy second. Right then, the bell for the start of class rang in the distance. I bumped my shoulder past his arm and walked straight into the lecture hall through the back door without looking back. From behind me, Carter's suppressed, furious voice echoed, "Chloe, you are truly the most cold-blooded person I have ever met." I twitched the corners of my mouth, pulling up a sarcastic, mocking smile. "Cold-blooded? Compared to all of you hypocritical, ungrateful pieces of garbage, my behavior was absolutely nothing. Despite everything, I eventually ended up going to the hospital to see Julian. The moment I pushed open the door to his ward, a bizarre, sickening odor hit my nose. Julian's right leg was wrapped in thick, heavy bandages stained with dried yellowish medication, and seeping dark brown streaks of blood. It was a nauseating sight. I had heard his injuries were incredibly severe. The doctors had to continuously debride the wounds and administer heavy antibiotics, and surgery could only be performed once the rampant infection was controlled. I looked at the man half propped up against the headboard. In just a week, he had lost an alarming amount of weight, his pale cheeks deeply hollowed out. He looked exactly like I had during this same period in my previous life. He appeared incredibly weak, yet the moment his eyes landed on me, they lit up with life. "Chloe, you're here." His raspy voice was filled with sheer joy. He excitedly tried to sit up straighter. The sudden movement must have aggravated his wounds, causing him to fiercely furrow his brow and let out a painful groan. However, in the very next second, when his gaze inadvertently drifted down and landed on my perfectly intact left leg, the joy brimming in his eyes abruptly violently shuddered. Julian fell completely silent, his stare fiercely nailed to my left leg. I quietly walked over to the visitor's chair beside his bed, sat down, and placed my canvas bag on my lap. "Chloe, why didn't you save me that day? Or you clearly could have stopped me. I know you could have." His voice wasn't loud, but it was laced with an uncontrollable violent tremor. My chest fiercely tightened, and a wave of bitter, acidic emotion instantly spread through every bone and nerve in my body. Julian, had he also reincarnated? I stared at him coldly, completely refusing to answer his question. My intense glare made him uncomfortable, and a bitter, mocking smirk slowly tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I've been lying in this hospital from a car crash for days, and it is a sheer miracle Her Highness finally remembered to come see me," he sneered. "Yes, because final exams are next month, and then it is summer break," I replied simply. Julian seemed confused by my words, frowning at me in utter bewilderment. "I am not planning on taking a summer job this year. I've made plans with friends to travel to Europe, so I need you to pay back that $8,500 right now," I demanded. Julian's eyes widened in sheer disbelief, the rims of his eyes slowly turning a furious bloodshot red. His voice broke as he spoke. "You came all the way to the hospital just to demand money from me. Chloe, do you even have a heart? Did you ever truly love me?" Julian's question made me burst into a dark, humorless laugh. He actually had the audacity to ask if I had ever truly loved him. How exactly did I lose my leg in our past life? Was it because I simply didn't want it anymore? The memory of Carter claiming Julian only used me as a replacement for Lily instantly violently surfaced in my mind, followed closely by the sickening image of him sitting at my grave, delivering that cruel monologue right after my death. How could absolute human garbage like him ever deserve my love again? I scoffed loudly. Julian, do you think I'm some idiot? You can just string along and fool whenever you want? He froze slightly. Then his face contorted with anger as he shot back. When have I ever fooled you? In our previous life, I worked tirelessly without complaint, taking care of a cripple like you for 17 whole years. What more do you want? I let out a chilling sneer. Took care of me? Sure, you took care of me for the first 2 years before we got married. But most of the time, I was left completely alone in that house. I was the one hobbling around on crutches, hopping on one leg, trying to take care of myself. Later, when we got married and you became rich, you simply hired a maid and patted yourself on the back like you were some kind of saint. Julian, place your hand over your heart, and tell me honestly, how many times did you actually take care of me? Julian's face flushed a deep crimson. Didn't I need to work? Didn't I need to make money? Every business dinner, every business trip I took, was it not all for you and our family? Do you think the $30,000 I gave you every month just fell from the sky? Busyness dinners, business trips. I repeated his words with dripping sarcasm. Were you doing business when you were rolling around in bed with Lily Thorne at the Bayview Villa? Or were you on a business trip when you attended parent-teacher conferences for your middle school-aged daughter? Hearing me explicitly mention Lily and their daughter, Julian's expression drastically morphed, all the blood instantly draining from his face. After a brief suffocating silence, a bizarre twisted smile stretched across his lips. He said, "Chloe, do you have any idea what it felt like every time I had to sleep with you and look at that disgusting stump of a left leg? I just wanted to throw up. Honestly, it was a pure physical nauseating revulsion. Every single time we were intimate, I had to secretly take medication beforehand and aggressively suppress my disgust just to face you. If that is what you mean by fooling you, then yes, I definitely fooled you." Every single word he spoke was like a poison-laced dagger, violently plunging straight into my heart and twisting mercilessly. I desperately fought to keep myself composed, but my jaw clenched so hard my teeth began to chatter. The tears were threatening to burst past my defenses. But, no. I absolutely refused to break down in front of this trash. I shot up from the chair, raised my right hand, summoned every ounce of strength in my body, and viciously slapped him straight across the face. "Julian Mercer, you are a pathetic motherfucking piece of shit. Go to hell. Why the fuck didn't that car just kill you on the spot?" The violent impact snapped the man's head to the side. He pushed his tongue against the corner of his bleeding mouth, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down. I took a deep breath, fighting with everything I had to iron out the furious tremble in my voice. "Today I have absolutely zero interest in hearing how deeply disgusted you were by me in the past. And I have no desire to bring up the fact that I saved your miserable life. Since all of that belongs to our past life, there is no need for anyone to ever bring it up again. I came here for exactly 2 things. 1, we are officially breaking up, and 2, I want you to return my money immediately. From this moment on, we are completely severing all ties. We have nothing to do with each other." I stood entirely still beside his hospital bed, my arms tightly crossed over my chest, radiating absolute, unyielding coldness. I watched with a stony expression, as Julian's face darkened into a furious, humiliated scowl. With trembling hands, he picked up his smartphone and began humiliatingly calling his relatives and frat brothers, one by one, begging to borrow enough money to pay me back. After about 20 agonizing minutes of hushed, desperate conversations, my phone finally buzzed. The banking app notification illuminated my screen, confirming that a transfer of exactly $8,500 had successfully cleared into my account. Without a second of hesitation, I pulled up his contact profile, right in front of him, and permanently blocked his phone number, his social media accounts, and every other possible avenue of communication, I turned on my heel, ready to walk out of that suffocating hospital room, and out of his life forever. But just as my hand brushed the cold metal of the doorknob, Julian's bitter, venomous voice sliced through the heavy silence from behind me. "Chloe, let's see exactly how well you managed to survive without me," he spat, his words dripping with sheer malice. "I want to see how far you get relying entirely on that aggressively money-hungry father of yours and your scheming, manipulative stepmother. When you're drowning and you finally regret everything, don't think you can just come crawling back to me. I probably won't even accept you then." My footsteps instantly faltered. Unbidden, the repulsive, sickening faces of that wretched couple violently surfaced in my mind's eye. That woman was originally my mother's own cousin. When my mother was diagnosed with terminal ovarian cancer, that woman had moved into our house under the guise of helping care for her. Instead, she ended up taking care of my father straight into his own bed. After my mother passed away, I immediately became a massive thorn in the woman's side. Her heart and mind were solely focused on herself, and the daughter she brought from her previous marriage. She constantly racked her brain, devising cruel ways to kick me out of the house before I had even turned 14. My father turned a completely blind eye to her abuse, eventually yielding to her relentless nagging by trying to force me to drop out of high school and work a minimum wage job to pay rent. Naturally, I viciously refused. Thankfully, my middle school grades were exceptional, earning me a full-ride scholarship that waived my high school tuition. Later, I worked tirelessly to maintain academic grants, and I even secretly tracked down a jeweler to sell the only thing my mother left me, a vintage solid gold bracelet, just to barely scrape by and survive those 3 brutal years of high school. Julian Mercer knew exactly how toxic and completely broken my biological family was. He knew intimately how much I profoundly loathed those 2 disgusting excuses for human beings. Yet now, in a pathetic attempt to retain power over me, he was deliberately using my deepest trauma as a weapon to intentionally trigger me. A blind, roaring fury shot straight to the top of my head. I violently spun around, storming back to the edge of his hospital bed. I raised my hand and delivered another vicious, resounding slap across his face, followed immediately by spitting directly on him. "I spit on you. You actually think I would ever turn back to you?" I screamed, my voice shaking with raw rage. "It is 12 o'clock in the afternoon. What kind of delusional fucking daydream are you having right now? As far as I'm concerned, you are exactly the same as those 2 filthy animals. You all crawled out of the same disgusting gutter." Julian's face instantly twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated demonic rage, the veins bulging aggressively against his temples. "Chloe," he roared, lunging forward off the hospital mattress, desperate to grab me. But because his shattered right leg was heavily casted and completely unable to bear weight, his momentum failed him. He violently tipped forward, crashing heavily onto the hard linoleum floor in a pathetic, tangled heap. "Chloe!" He roared my name through gritted teeth, looking as though he wanted nothing more than to skin me alive and swallow me whole. I stood above him, casting one final, freezing look of absolute contempt down at his writhing form. Then, I turned my back on him and forcefully slammed the hospital door shut behind me, walking away without a single ounce of regret. I had completely and entirely severed all ties with Julian, blocking him from every facet of my existence. However, updates regarding his miserable situation still inevitably filtered into my ears through the relentless gossip of my classmates. I heard that his surgical wounds had suffered a catastrophic infection, rapidly deteriorating into severe sepsis. He ended up spending over a month fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. His parents eventually had to travel to the university administration building to officially process a medical leave of absence for him. During that time, Lily Thorne played the role of the devoted angel perfectly. To encourage him, she actually wore a pristine white bridal veil into his hospital room, taking tragically romantic photos of them passionately kissing over his sickbed. The campus forums exploded with dedicated threads documenting their tragic love story. Students endlessly romanticized her unwavering dedication to a severely injured man, praising them as the absolute epitome of true love. But I had zero time or energy to pay attention to their theatrical nonsense. I was drowning in a grueling schedule, intensely preparing for the Advanced United Nations Interpretation Certification exams, furiously studying for graduate school entrance exams, and dedicating every spare second to enjoying the sheer, intoxicating freedom of running on two perfectly healthy legs. Every single day was fully immersed in BBC News broadcasts and dense TED Talks. I was practicing simultaneous interpretation, so intensely that I was practically doing it in my sleep. The name Julian Mercer was swiftly and efficiently completely scrubbed from my mind by the sheer volume of my academic ambitions. The next time I actually laid eyes on him in person, it was already the freezing winter of my senior year, right before the New Year holidays. By then, I had finished my preliminary grad school exams a few days prior, and my perpetually frayed nerves were finally allowed a brief, fleeting moment of relaxation. That afternoon, I was holding a steaming cup of hot cocoa, sitting quietly on a bench by the campus's artificial lake, watching the flocks of red-billed gulls diving and playing across the freezing water. Suddenly, a fierce escalating argument erupted from a short distance away. "Julian, why couldn't you just stay put in your damn apartment? Why the hell are you coming to campus acting like a total lunatic? Look at yourself. You look like a miserable ghost. And you totally scared my friend away." A woman's voice shrieked, thick with profound irritation and intense disgust. I turned my head toward the commotion. Standing behind the bare, leafless branches of a dormant oak tree were two incredibly familiar silhouettes. Despite the biting winter cold, Julian was only wearing a thin, heavily wrinkled plaid shirt. He had lost an alarming amount of weight, his frame practically skeletal, and as he hunched over, leaning heavily on a pair of metal crutches, he looked indescribably pathetic. His eyes were completely bloodshot, as he fired back with bitter, accusatory rage. "A friend? You're actually trying to tell me that guy was just a friend? You two were practically swallowing each other's faces, and you expect me to believe he is just a friend? Lily, I've only been on medical leave for a few months, and you were already so desperately impatient that you went behind my back to hook up with someone else. No wonder you've been refusing to answer my calls or text messages lately. If I hadn't secretly dragged myself onto campus today, I never would have known you were cheating on me." Lily's face contorted into a mask of pure impatience. "My personal life is absolutely none of your business anymore. Even if I don't date him, do you actually expect me to marry you? If I had known you were going to be permanently branded with a level 7 physical disability, I never would have gotten back together with you, in the first place. If I dared to bring a cripple like you home to meet my parents, they would literally break my legs. You're disgusted by me." Julian's frail body began to violently tremble in the freezing wind. He lost all semblance of control, screaming hysterically, "Have you forgotten exactly who I became this pathetic monster for? If I hadn't been rushing across the street to buy you your stupid tampons, how could I have possibly been hit by that car? Then go call the cops." Lily shot back, her voice completely devoid of empathy, cold as ice. "Go on, if you have the guts. Have the police arrest me. You're the idiot who ran across the street without looking. Honestly, that poor driver who hit you had the worst luck in the world. I am warning you. Stay the hell away from me from now on. Do not come looking for me ever again. We have absolutely zero connection to each other." The second the words left her mouth, Lily turned swiftly on her heel and strutted away. Julian looked as though the invisible strings holding his puppet body upright had been brutally slashed. His crutches slipped from his grip, clattering loudly against the pavement, and his lopsided center of gravity sent him violently crashing onto his injured right side. A cold, mocking smile played at the corners of my mouth as I sat there, having watched the entire theatrical meltdown from start to finish. Julian painfully struggled against the freezing ground, trying desperately to push himself back up. But the moment he lifted his head, his gaze collided directly with mine. He flinched violently, as if he had been struck by a bolt of lightning, his entire body freezing completely solid in the biting winter wind. It was Monday morning, precisely time for my 8 a.m. lecture. I had my noise-canceling headphones securely over my ears, listening to an English podcast while I carried a piping hot bag of steamed dumplings and a cup of warm soy milk. I hurried into the crowded lecture hall. The moment I spotted an empty seat and settled down, my good friend Mia immediately slid into the chair right next to me. She aggressively nudged my elbow, a conspiratorial, mysterious glint shining brightly in her eyes. Confused, I pulled my headphones down around my neck. Mia leaned in close, dramatically dropping her voice to a hushed whisper. "Chloe, did you hear the insane news? Julian's supposedly perfect girlfriend from the fine arts college completely dumped him and hooked up with a junior from the athletics department." She couldn't even begin to hide the wildly excited, gossip-hungry grin spreading across her face. Her tone was practically vibrating with thrill. Apparently yesterday the girl and the sports major went to a cheap motel off campus to hook up, but Julian somehow tracked them down and ambushed them right outside their room. Julian actually tried to fight the guy, but he is literally crippled in one leg. How on earth could he ever stand a chance against a giant muscular sports major? Exactly as you'd expect, he got the absolute living daylights beaten out of him and was thrown right back into the hospital last night. My hand, which had been in the middle of tearing open the paper bag holding my breakfast, paused midair. Mia forged ahead, breathless with excitement. The actual police had to be called out yesterday. The sports guy and the girl were both shoved into the back of a squad car and taken to the precinct. It is so wildly ridiculous you couldn't even script it. Well, she suddenly grabbed my wrist, blinking her large expressive eyes at me. "Tell me the truth. Don't you feel incredibly vindicated hearing all of this?" I let out a soft laugh and nodded genuinely. "Yeah, honestly, it feels extremely vindicating. They completely deserve everything coming to them." Mia burst into a bright, genuine giggle. "That is the spirit. Ever since you dumped Julian after his crash, I feel like I've barely seen you crack a real smile. Listen, finding a three-legged toad in this world might be difficult, but there is an absolutely endless supply of perfectly healthy, two-legged men out there." I looked at her with profound gratitude. Among all the students in my cohort, Mia was the single solitary person who had consistently shown me unwavering kindness. To the vast majority of our classmates, I was the ultimate, cold-blooded opportunist, the evil villain, who immediately abandoned her boyfriend the second he got hurt in a horrific accident. They viewed me as a heartless, calculating monster unfit for friendship. Mia bumped my shoulder playfully, her eyes curving into happy crescents. "Oh, by the way, I heard you passed the advanced interpretation oral exams on your very first try. You are so incredibly amazing." I smiled warmly. "I think I just got a little lucky with the prompts this year. Tell you what, I'm taking you out to a nice dinner tonight. You can pick any restaurant you want. It is on me." "Hell yes," she cheered. The final 6 months of university flew by in an absolute blur. Before I fully realized it, the first semester of my senior year was drawing to a rapid close. With final exams officially over, a large portion of the student body was already packing up and vacating the campus. Once we submitted our final papers for our advanced financial engineering seminar, my roommates also began stuffing their suitcases to head home for the holidays. Mia had an absolute mountain of luggage, so she called me to help haul her heavy boxes down the stairs and load them into the trunk of a waiting taxi outside the gates. After waving goodbye to Mia and trudging back to my dorm room, I realized the other 3 beds were completely empty. Everyone else had already left. Standing alone in the center of the completely silent, hollowed-out room, an unexpected, profound wave of melancholy washed over me. I vividly remembered the very first time I stepped onto this campus, in September of my freshman year, awkwardly introducing myself to the strangers who would become my roommates. Now, graduation was rapidly approaching. Next semester, aside from a handful of students staying behind to prep for grad school interviews, everyone would scatter across the country to begin their corporate internships. The next time we would all be in the same room would likely be for our final thesis defenses. I went to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and stood staring at my reflection in the mirror for a long time. My heart felt strangely empty. Shaking off the nostalgia, I grabbed my canvas tote bag and headed downstairs, planning to walk to the campus grocery store to stock up on milk and non-perishable snacks. In just 2 days, even the campus stores would lock their doors for the break. The exact moment I stepped out of the heavy glass doors of the dormitory building, my eyes locked onto a deeply familiar silhouette. Standing a short distance away, I briefly glanced at Julian Mercer, who was leaning heavily on his metal crutches near the walking path, and immediately tried to pretend I didn't see him, intending to simply breeze right past. But he spotted me instantly. A pathetic look of desperate joy illuminated his gaunt face, and he awkwardly hoisted himself up, hopping a few agonizing steps forward on his good leg, until he was physically blocking my path. "Chloe, you finally came down. I desperately need to talk to you," he pleaded. I had absolutely zero desire to be entangled in his toxic mess ever again. I looked at him with icy disdain and said, "Get out of my way. You are polluting the fresh air I'm trying to breathe." His eyes instantly reddened, welling with unshed tears, as he stared intently at me. His gaze overflowed with a sickeningly intense, manufactured devotion. "Chloe, please don't be like this. I specifically waited out here in the freezing cold just for you. Don't you have nowhere to go for winter break? I went ahead and rented the exact same apartment we lived in during our previous life. I can help you move your things over there, and we can spend the holidays together, just the two of us." I irritably massaged my throbbing temples. Did this absolute lunatic seriously believe I harbored any nostalgic affection for that miserable, suffocating apartment that had served as my prison? "Julian, are you literally out of your mind? Didn't you explicitly declare that if there was a next life, the mountains would be high, the rivers would be wide, and we would never meet again? Who exactly are you putting on this pathetic display of deep affection for?" Saying that, I stepped to the side, attempting to walk around him, but Julian lunged forward, his hand snapping out to tightly grip my upper arm. "I'm so sorry, I was a complete bastard. My mind was entirely clouded by stupidity." "I take every single one of those words back," he cried. To prove his point, he raised his free hand and viciously slapped himself across the face twice. "Chloe, I deeply regret everything. Please, let's get back together. I swear to God, in this lifetime, I will treat you right." I was so unbelievably speechless. I felt my sanity slipping. This level of delusion was astronomical. I violently ripped my arm out of his grasp. "Get your filthy hands off me. Who the hell gave you the right to even touch me?" Julian's face drained of all color, the moisture in his eyes spilling over into pathetic tears. "Chloe, how can you be so incredibly heartless? For better or worse, we were a married couple for over a decade. I absolutely refuse to believe you don't have a single drop of feelings left for me." The audacity of him accusing me of being heartless was staggering. In our past life, when he was leaving me alone to rot in a wheelchair, he certainly never stopped to question his own cruelty. Seeing that he was firmly planting his body in my way, stubbornly refusing to let me pass, I didn't hesitate. I lifted my foot, took aim directly at his healthy, uninjured left leg, and delivered a vicious full-force kick straight to his shin. He let out a sharp howl of intense pain. Since his other leg was already crippled and entirely unable to support his body weight, the sudden attack completely destroyed his balance. He stumbled wildly for a few steps before crashing violently back down onto the freezing concrete. I shrugged innocently. "I explicitly told you to get out of my way, but you relentlessly harassed me and absolutely refused to let go. I had reasonable grounds to suspect you were attempting to illegally restrict my personal freedom. What I just did was nothing more than basic self-defense." Lying sprawled out on the icy ground, Julian looked up at me with an expression of profound sorrow, mixed with a sickeningly masochistic devotion. "Chloe, I don't blame you," he whispered tragically. "If kicking me makes you feel even a little bit better, I'm completely willing to endure it. You can kick me as many times as you want, as long as it means you'll eventually forgive me." Looking at his disgustingly submissive, pathetic expression, I honestly feared that hitting him again would only give him some kind of twisted, sick satisfaction. Since the path was now clear, and no one was actively blocking my way, I had zero time to waste arguing with garbage. I simply lifted my feet and stepped cleanly directly over his fallen body. walking away without a second glance. In late February, the admission results for the graduate school entrance exams were finally released. My scores were exceptionally high, landing over 20 points above my absolute best performance in any of the simulated mock exams. It was a monumental, overperforming triumph. However, to play it safe and base my future on a solid foundation, I chose not to aggressively apply for the hyper-competitive Ivy League institutions. Instead, I accepted an offer from a highly respected, top-tier university renowned for its specialized, cutting-edge master's program in financial technology. Then came the grueling, intense preparation for the rigorous interview rounds. The next time I heard any news regarding Julian Mercer, I was already 6 months into my graduate studies. Ever since that day I kicked his crutch away. He had relentlessly attempted to harass me for a brief period, but every single time he showed up, I either physically fought him off, called campus security, or dialed 911. Eventually, he completely gave up, and his miserable shadow completely vanished from my life. One chilly afternoon, I had just walked out of the quantitative finance computer lab when my phone buzzed. It was a lengthy voice memo from Mia. Through the crackling audio, she eagerly informed me that Lily Thorne and Julian had officially tied the knot, and they had even invited quite a few of our former college classmates to the reception. Wait, didn't they have an explosive breakup last winter? I typed back, genuinely curious. Mia immediately replied, unloading a wildly explosive, incredibly dark story. After graduating, Lily had secured a prestigious internship as a music teacher at an elite private preparatory school. However, she ended up having a torrid affair with the wealthy father of one of her elementary school students. The man's wife, a fiercely protective socialite, inevitably discovered the betrayal. In a brutal act of vengeance, the wife leaked high-definition dashcam footage of their intimate encounters, along with a massive file of explicit text messages, directly onto social media platforms. Because the man was a high-profile executive at a publicly traded corporation, the scandal detonated instantly, trending nationwide overnight. TB Corporatexacotten Dashcam Scandal, Prep School Music. Teacher Homeu Wrecker, Wife Exposes Billionaire, Husband Sapphire. Shortly after the digital crucifixion, Lily was walking home late one night, when she was suddenly ambushed and drugged with a powerful sedative. When she finally regained consciousness in a dark alley, she found her hands completely soaked in blood. Medical examinations revealed that the tendons in both of her wrists had been surgically precisely severed. After extensive emergency surgery and physical therapy, she managed to regain basic, everyday functionality. But her dreams of ever playing the piano or the harp again were completely permanently destroyed. So let me guess, I said into my phone. Julian seized that exact moment of absolute vulnerability to swoop back in. You hit the nail on the head, Mia replied. Julian actively sought Lily out and swore he would take care of her for the rest of her life. They just hosted a massive, incredibly lavish wedding a few days ago. My boyfriend actually attended. I smiled to myself. They truly were a match made in hell, in both lifetimes. Those two toxic souls inevitably ended up binding themselves to each other. After successfully defending my master's thesis, I was recruited by a premier global investment bank as an elite management trainee. The demanding role required me to constantly fly back and forth between our headquarters in New York and our major financial hub in London. I was busier than ever, constantly living out of suitcases and executive lounges. Despite the chaotic schedule, I still managed to carve out time for romance, eventually dating a brilliant fellow alumni I met during grad school, who specialized in artificial intelligence. On Valentine's Day, because I was stationed in London closing a massive portfolio deal, I stayed up late after work to enjoy a long romantic FaceTime call with my boyfriend. By the time we hung up, it was well past midnight. I opened my messaging app and noticed my old college alumni group chat had suddenly exploded with over 100 unread notifications. Everyone seemed to be frantically discussing Lily and Julian. Curiosity piqued. I scrolled all the way to the top of the chat history. The very first message was a forwarded link to a major news outlet's breaking crime article, "Woman driven to madness by domestic abuse poisons entire family with strychnine." In the accompanying photo, the suspect wearing the bright Orange County Jail jumpsuit, her head bowed as she was swarmed by reporters, was unmistakably Lily Thorne, according to Lily's own tearful confession to the police. The moment she married Julian, her life violently plummeted into an inescapable abyss. Not only was she forced to act as a full-time caregiver for her permanently crippled husband, but she was also subjected to the relentless degrading cruelty of his bitter parents. Even when she became pregnant, her mother-in-law brutally ordered her around like a medieval servant. One evening, when Lily weakly asked if she could delay her chores because she was feeling ill, her mother-in-law viciously shoved her. Lily fell hard, her stomach violently striking the sharp corner of a heavy oak dining table. She tragically miscarried the baby, but instead of offering comfort, Julian blamed her. He screamed that she was a useless waste of space who couldn't even protect her own unborn child. The very day she returned home from the hospital after her dilation and curettage procedure, her husband brutally beat her. From that day forward, Julian morphed into an absolute monster. He constantly devised new, sickening ways to physically and psychologically torture her. Every time she fell to her knees, weeping and begging for mercy, a deeply twisted, sadistic thrill would light up his eyes. She lived every single second in absolute terror and paralyzing despair. She desperately attempted to run away, to file for divorce, to beg her own parents for salvation, but every single failed attempt only resulted in more severe, collective beatings from Julian and his monstrous parents. Eventually, her mind completely shattered. The prolonged suffocating agony pushed her past the point of no return, and she completely gave up on escaping. She purchased a massive quantity of lethal rat poison, and methodically laced it into the family's meals over a series of days. The horrifying reality was only exposed when her mother-in-law suddenly began violently vomiting blood and collapsed, prompting an emergency rush to the hospital. Staring at the grim news report, I felt no vindictive joy. Nor did I feel any sorrow or pity. Perhaps the ultimate sign of true healing and moving on is looking at the people who completely destroyed your past life, and feeling absolutely nothing but a hollow, emotionless void. In the 18th month of my rigorous management trainee program, I finally stood before the executive board and successfully passed my ultimate evaluation defense. When the human resources director handed me my official contract, the staggering base salary printed on the crisp white paper made me involuntarily hold my breath. And that massive figure didn't even include the lucrative performance-based year-end bonuses I was practically guaranteed to receive. My life had truly become brilliant and full of light. I possessed a perfectly healthy, strong body, an incredibly fulfilling and lucrative career, and a loving, equally ambitious partner. In my previous life, I had been hopelessly trapped in a dark, suffocating room, enduring unimaginable physical agony and psychological torment. But thankfully, I was now standing on the precipice of an entirely new, boundless horizon. The wind blowing from the other side was crisp, clean, and tasted of absolute freedom. Yet occasionally, in the quiet dead of night, I felt a tiny unresolved corner of my heart aching for closure. It wasn't until one late night, while I was working overtime in my high-rise corner office, staring out at the glittering city skyline, that a sudden, visceral memory flashed through my mind. The disgustingly smug faces of my biological father and my manipulative stepmother. Doing the mental math, I realized it had been 6 or 7 years since we had last spoken. It was finally time for me to pay a little visit and show my concern for their wonderful family. Taking advantage of my accrued vacation days, I flew back to my suburban hometown, whether by absolute sheer coincidence or pure fate. The week I arrived happened to be the exact same week my stepsister was celebrating her lavish engagement. It was glaringly obvious that my entire family was absolutely ecstatic about her choice of fiancé. If my father and stepmother had tails, they would have been wagging them straight up to the ceiling in sheer arrogance. The groom-to-be was a classic trust fund baby, the sole heir to a massive, highly profitable local manufacturing empire. He was tall, classically handsome, and dripping with generational wealth. It was no wonder my stepsister looked at him, with eyes overflowing with pure, unadulterated devotion and joy. My father and stepmother barely registered my sudden reappearance. They treated me with the same icy, indifferent coldness they always had. The only time they ever showed any genuine enthusiasm in my presence was when they were loudly obnoxiously bragging about their daughter successfully hooking a golden goose. During my brief stay in my hometown, I utilized a few corporate connections to dig up detailed, comprehensive information regarding the fiancé's family business. I scoured online job portals and coincidentally found a listing from his factory urgently seeking to hire a front desk receptionist. Seeing the opportunity, I reached out to a specialized agency and paid a premium to hire a stunningly gorgeous, highly charismatic amateur actress. I meticulously drafted a strategic script for her, instructing her to apply for the receptionist position and subtly, organically integrate herself into my darling stepsister's fiancé's orbit. I offered a massive incentive if she successfully managed to expose his true colors and cause them to aggressively break off the engagement. I would wire her an additional $30,000 bonus. Of course, I explicitly strictly forbade her from engaging in any illegal or unethical coercion. If the man eagerly took the bait and threw himself at her of his own free will, well, that was entirely a reflection of his own moral bankruptcy. The girl absolutely did not disappoint me. It only took 3 short months for the explosive news to reach my ears. My stepsister and her wealthy fiancé had engaged in a catastrophic, screaming breakup. 2 months after that spectacular fallout, the actress sent me a text. It was a digital transfer of $1,200, a traditional lucky wedding sum, accompanied by a photograph of 2 shiny new marriage certificates. The bride was her. The groom was without a doubt my stepsister's former fiancé. Before my brain could even fully process the image, she initiated a FaceTime video call. The second I answered, her crisp, overjoyed voice rang out through the speaker. "Sister, please accept the lucky money. James and I are officially holding our wedding ceremony next month. Would you do me the absolute honor of being my bridesmaid?" "Huh?" I muttered, momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of her success. Recovering quickly, I nodded. "Oh right, of course. Let me go ahead and wire you that performance bonus we agreed on. Is it still the same bank account number you gave me before?" She immediately waved her hand, cutting me off with a bright laugh. "I haven't even properly thanked you for introducing me to James. I absolutely don't want the bonus money. However, I actually just found out yesterday that I'm pregnant. Would you be willing to be my baby's godmother?" Well, seeing my hesitation, she immediately deployed an offer she knew I couldn't possibly refuse. With a sly, knowing wink, she added, "Hey, if in the near future you ever find yourself needing the services of a professional actor again, I have amazing connections in the industry I can introduce you to." I paused, thought about it for a second, and a wicked smile spread across my face. "Really? Do you happen to know any seasoned actors in the older demographic? Like, say, men in their late 40s or 50s. Through the screen, I watched her confidently pat her chest. "Absolutely, consider it done. Send me the exact time and location of the wedding venue." I laughed. "Your sister will absolutely be there." Now, hearing all of this, some people out there might accuse me of being incredibly cruel, claiming that my stepsister was simply an innocent bystander in the sins of her parents. But let me remind you of the past, when her mother shamelessly crawled into my father's bed, causing my terminally ill mother to literally vomit blood in agonizing heartbreak, when she aggressively moved into my childhood bedroom, casually tossing my precious belongings into the neighborhood dumpsters like garbage, when she maliciously rallied the entire school to brutally bully me, isolating me and branding me with disgusting nicknames. Absolutely no one stepped up to ask if I was innocent. If her mother possessed the cunning ability to seduce my father away from his dying wife, then why on earth shouldn't someone else be allowed to seduce her man away? Look at it from a completely objective perspective. Wasn't I technically doing her a massive favor by helping her identify a massive red flag before she signed a legally binding marriage document? A weak-willed man who could be so effortlessly seduced away by a pretty receptionist is hardly a prize worth keeping. If she ever somehow discovers the truth and decides she wants to come find me to offer her gratitude, I will simply look her dead in the eye and reply with absolute unyielding sincerity, "Oh please, don't mention it. It's exactly what a loving older sister should do."
That's all for today. I'm Lina. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories every week. Thanks for watching.